It's Dave Nemo Weekends. Today's program features Jimmy Mack
and Claire Marie.
She came from planet Claire. I knew she came from there. She drove a Plymouth Satellite, faster than the speed of light.
Okay, so when I first started reading this book, when I actually began to dig into You Might Feel a Little Prick by Reuben Leader, as I read it this morning and yesterday and the day before that, I went through it and I was in agony in the first 3 chapters. I mean, just absolute agony, and I was laughing and utterly horrified at the same time. Before I get to any more of that, let me tell you about the gentleman who is joining us this morning. It's an absolute pleasure to have Reuben Leader here this morning. I don't even know where to begin here. So what you say, he grew up in an indie film world. He has a family of filmmakers and writers and dreamers. He wrote and directed the feature film Baltic Storm. He sold screenplays to DreamWorks. He has worked for Magnum PI. He has received an NAACP Image Award nomination for a guest. He's worked everywhere, and it's our pleasure to welcome him. It's his first novel. Reuben Leader, welcome to the show. Sorry, I just gushed about this thing. I'm crazy about it.
Well, thank you, Jimmy. I really do appreciate that. It was hard earned. It took a while. It took about 2 years to write it, but about 20 years to go through it. So I appreciate that.
Let me just also say on a kind of a fun note to let our listeners know, as you kind of picked up on, you heard Claire Marie talk about This Is Hawaii's anniversary. You have, people don't realize this, Jurassic Park, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and Magnum P.I. There are a lot of films and a lot of movies that were made in Hawaii. You spent a lot of time there, didn't you?
Yeah, I spent 6 years in Hawaii, and it was the people you meet. You were talking earlier about the people you meet on the jobs is sometimes way more important than the jobs. I think for me that's been the case in a lot of the jobs I've had, particularly in Hawaii on Magnum. We had a director named Ivan Dixon. He's not with us anymore, but he was the African-American actor in Hogan's Heroes. And then later on he became a TV director, and he wound up directing a lot of Magnums, and he was famous. He was beloved by the crew because he would always wrap early on Friday afternoons instead of having us work till midnight. And so we're standing watching the sunset on the beach at Diamond Head, and he says, "Reuben, what do you see?" And I went, "I don't know, Ivan, just sunsetting. There's people on the beach, and let's go get a drink." And he's going, "No, tell me what you see." And I couldn't get what he was getting at. And he said, "What you're seeing is everybody is some sort of shade of brown, light brown, dark brown, yellow brown." And he said, "This is what the world's going to look like in a couple of generations. Hawaii's the vanguard, and I'm going to retire here." And he did. He retired. He opened a radio station in Maui. I used to go visit him every year. The kids who worked for him adored him, and this was truly a man living out his dreams. It was quite special. So Claire Marie was right. Claire Marie.
Claire Marie, you got it right. That's the thing too.
It's early for me.
Yeah, I totally understand. Hawaii, by the way, we always make the joke that, the states are the laboratories of democracy, and they are the future of America, much more so than the federal government. And so it's kind of nice to hear that they kind of become laboratories in all sorts of wonderful and sometimes unexpected and strange ways. There's a circuitous route, by the way, to kind of, like I said, I could pick your brain of all the wonderful stories you have, but I really want to focus on what you've achieved here. This is your debut novel. For all the writing and all the wonder and stories you've given so many people who have enjoyed television and movies and, so many contributions, this is the first time you've got a pillar-to-post novel. Let's talk about the route that gets us from the ideas of nonfiction into a world of fiction where you're able to kind of mix and match both horror and comedy and social satire at the same time. Tell us the journey to get us to this book.
All right. Try and do it concisely. Around 45 or so, I was a jock. I played full-court basketball, and I pitched hardball, And until about 45, I was fine. Nothing. I never had a serious injury. Never pulled a hamstring once in a while, but never had nothing. And then my back started hurting, and so I went to a doctor. And to make a long story short, I got on this treadmill of guys in white coats saying surgery is our last resort. And but in the meantime, they would give you procedures and on and on and on, pills and physical therapy and shots and let's burn this nerve and then the brain won't feel the pain, on and on and on. And they're making money all the time off of it. And it always ends up with the last resort being surgery is our last resort. What they don't tell you, the surgery is a gateway to more surgeries, because you get back surgery, and I realize a lot of your audience are sitting in trucks and they gotta have back pain, and it's just no fun. I never used to take it seriously. You go, where's the blood? But back pain is real. And so you get a surgery to fix a disc, and what they don't tell you at the time is that puts pressure on the surrounding discs. So they're time bombs. They'll go in a couple of years. You need another surgery. Then you only have so many discs, and then ultimately they wind up fusing them, and you have a spinal fusion. Then that puts pressure on the discs surrounding those, and you get another spinal fusion. I remember sitting in a waiting room going, and listening as people talk, and I'm on my third one, and I'm thinking, well, if I ever get there, I'm going to suck on a gas pipe. Well, I got there, but I didn't suck on the gas pipe. I turned it into this book. It originally was a screenplay. That's what I was trained to do. That's what I've done all my life. And I got a prominent director to give it to her agent, the biggest agency in town. And they package movies, which means they supply the movie stars, they supply the writer, they supply the director. And so it went to the story department and for coverage, which is basically a book report. And it couldn't have been better if I snuck down there and wrote it myself. I mean, they would strongly recommend, this is really good. And so the agent calls me that night from his car and says, my brother's a doctor, and he's not like that. And what do you say to that? I'll go, I don't know. Didn't even know you had a brother, and I wasn't writing about your brother. Everything I was writing was from personal experience. And sure, it's on steroids. I made it really funny, and there's a lot of guys I wanted to pay back, and I did in creative ways. And but everything out of here is based on truth. And he said, well, you got to soften it. And I kind of pushed back. So you learn to be polite. You learn to not argue with these guys because you can't win. And but I pushed back politely. And if this was in a movie, no one ever believed it. All of a sudden, I hear, oh, I got to go. I just got rear-ended. I didn't hear any sound effect. I didn't hear any bang. Anyway, he calls the director the next day and said, that guy, Reuben, he's really impossible to work with. And so when I heard that from the director, I called my agent and I said, don't send this out anywhere because it's going to get softened. And, I'm secure. And so I'm going to write this as a book. That way no one's going to change a word unless I say okay. And so that's how it became a book.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, it's like we have one of the great joys is that one of the guy who actually is partial runs this whole thing is a former book editor too. The great thing about writing a book is you usually have a great relationship with your editor if you're not your editor yourself, and they actually tell you ways to make the thing that you want to happen better, as opposed to telling you how you should write your book. But a great editor says, knows what you want to accomplish and helps you accomplish that. It's such a very different thing than making movies, isn't it? The opening 3 chapters, by the way, and I can go on into later stuff too because there's a series of really kind of great flourishing characters. But I do want to talk about this because so much of what you've talked about in your own life is very painful. How do you go about mixing? And there is a sardonic element to Magnum PI too, by the way. How do you mix a deep love of human beings, and that shows here, with also a really dark kind of examination of their worst sort of impulses, while at the same time making us laugh all throughout of it. And so basically I'm asking you, how do you kind of construct that to create that sort of back and forth that allows not one tone to overtake the next? Is that calculated, or do you let it just happen and then go back and track it?
A little bit of both. I mean, life isn't black and white, and there's humor in everything I do, and Magnum had tons of humor in it. We would have shows that when some episodes would never have a car chase, a punch would never be thrown, a shot would never go off, but they were still engrossing shows. And so I had a predilection for humor, and then the darkness of this subject and the darkness of some of the Magnum subjects were manifest. We go back to Cambodia for some real serious stuff. But so you learn to mix it, and it reflects life as it is. And also, I think something like this, where you want to talk about your experiences and warn other people, you got to couch it in humor. If there's no humor around it, it just becomes another angry voice. And I also wanted to talk about the nobility of the medical profession. They're not all bad, and
No.
There's some wonderful doctors out there. And I have the character of Julie, as you read the book. She represents that in this book, and she's based on a doctor that I know. And so it's more than black and white, and that's why there's humor, and that's why I couched it in humor, and I always have had a predilection to do that.
It's interesting, too, because you're also looking at, when you actually put humor in, it always comes in the form of Hawkeye Pierce. It comes in the form of the investigative journalist in Hospital Britannia. It comes in the form of George C. Scott's doctor in the hospital. You also here do some really interesting stuff, too, because you bring the element of a procedural in. Can you talk about also the fact that you have in the midst of this a murder investigation? And if I get this wrong, please correct me. It's Artemis Sikorsky, right? It's Sikorsky.
Yeah, Sikorsky. Yeah.
Okay. Can you talk about character construction? Because Julie is a wonderful character, and in many ways is the victim of the same kind of bureaucracy that patients find themselves in. In regards to creating a character like the lieutenant, the nearly retired lieutenant, as some people have phrased it, we're creating him. How do you kind of put yourself in these characters while at the same time giving them a life of their own?
I got to confess to ripping off myself here. On Magnum, I created a character, a PI from St. Louis called Luther Gillis, and did something very unique in Magnum. Tom Selleck, the Magnum character, did his own voiceovers. In the shows that Luther Gillis was in, where he came to Hawaii from St. Louis, and he couldn't adapt at all, but he would do his own voiceovers. So Magnum's voiceover and his voiceover competed. And so Luther Gillis, I sort of based him on a kind of, Philip Marlowe, Joe Friday kind of guy. And so I took the germ of that, gave that to Sikorsky. And Sikorsky, I'm not quite his age, but I've been through some of the stuff he's gone through. And so I used Sikorsky's voice to sort of be my voice in it, and that's where he came from. And he would go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to ask you. Wasn't that that was it Eugene Roach played that? Everybody knows that actor. Yeah. He's terrific. But that's it's kind of neat because I remember that character being a little bit more cantankerous than your lieutenant, a little bit more closed-minded, if I remember it correctly. But this is a great character. I really like this character very much, and I didn't realize it was. Now that I think about it, that really is. I don't mind that kind of stuff, though. I mean, that's important that they become like pieces, especially with a television show where you're kind of one and done with a character. You want to give them a larger life, don't you?
Yeah, that's why we brought him back a few times. He's gone. He's not with us anymore as well, but. He was a wonderful guy and a wonderful actor, and he could play. He had range too. He wasn't just this one note. He was, if you remember the movie Slaughterhouse-Five, the Kurt Vonnegut, based on the Kurt Vonnegut book, he was the really tough first sergeant in that squad. He had a range. I really liked him, and a sweet guy.
Yeah, just like I said, it's always really fun too when you. It's interesting because if you want to hang around a little bit longer, you're more than welcome. It's such a pleasure to have you on. I just got a chance to listen to some podcast and then went back and watched the people who created the podcast earlier television show and realized they had lifted one of the plots from the television show and used it as a subplot in one of their podcasts. And that is not, and it's not a bad thing. I mean, the idea is that, we think about people like, Leonardo da Vinci and the great artists having their workshops, and they're like working these things through. And I don't think there's any issue really with kind of, Michael Mann does it with L.A. Takedown and Heat, but the idea of working through one idea in one genre and then realizing that it might work better in another art form. And to kind of do that, are you problematized by that? Or are you just like me and say to yourself, you know what, it worked there, I want to see if I can make it work better here?
No, it just kind of came. You plan things out, you outline things, but I had no idea when Sikorsky came in. I set him up at the softball game, of course. You saw he was the umpire, and you saw the gun under his umpire's jacket. But and so, check the old Chekhov thing, set up a gun, use a gun. Anyway, I had no idea when he would make his entrance into the story that I would have him talk in first person. The book's in a very conventional third person, but when he comes in, it's his story and it's his perspective on what Julie and Nick are going through. And
but it's
so
that's so funny. I was going to say that's funny because you do the same thing in the Magnum PI thing, where you literally have a narrator literally hijack the voice of the work. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but it's kind of like, no, let's get some stuff straight. But you do something fun, too, because in the beginning of the book, it's like this awful thing happens, and then it's like the next chapter is 18 months earlier. I mean, you just basically say, here's your inciting incident. Let's go back and reconstruct what happened here. And it's really, really fun. Let me ask you this, too, before we're going to hit a break. Would you mind, I know it's early, can you stick around a little bit longer after this hard break coming up? Can you give me a little more time? If you're tired, I get it.
No, I'd be happy to. Thank you.
So here's my question for you. So you have this moment early on where you kind of just drop this person, you drop us into the middle of the story. We'll put it that way. And then you jump back 18 months earlier. Did you have an outline for this, or you just like kind of figuring this out as you go along and then going back and cleaning up the chaos and the comedy you've created?
There's all these computer programs nowadays that you enter information in and they create an outline of your story. I can't work like that. I have a old-fashioned whiteboard, and I just write down the scenes. I erase them. I move them around, and I try. I have a basic structure, but I try not to let it inhibit me. Otherwise, you miss out on so many golden opportunities, like Sikorsky speaking in first person. I never would have thought of that in an outline. No computer program would have thought of that. I'm sure I broke 1,000 rules there, but no. I just try. I trust. And another thing is when you've done it so long, you sort of trust yourself. And I've learned to trust myself in that field. And you know what? You make a mistake, it doesn't work. You just you've lost a little bit of time. You go back and do it another way.
The other thing is, too, it's a real great value lesson for our listeners, many of whom are interested in the possibility of, they're big audiobook listeners, they're big readers, but many of them are interested in writing memoirs or telling their own stories. I was working with somebody recently who had a scene in one of his books where he hasn't been able to finish it yet, but he came to me and he said, I'm trying to have this character explain how he got a hold of the FBI wiretapping transcript, and he's explaining it to him, and I said, but why don't you just write it as the transcript and have that be a chapter? I mean, good enough for Melville, good enough for you. So there must be something fun about being at a place in your life where you can just say, I want to have a first-person narrative in the middle of the story. I'm just going to do it. Have you gotten to the point where you can just unfilter yourself and not second-guess it and fix it later?
Yeah, I absolutely have. Because I have no one to answer to here. I have no boss. I'm my own boss, and the ultimate bosses are going to be the people who read the book, and it's either going to work for them or it's not. And I'm betting it will.
So let me ask you this too as we head into the break, and then we'll come back. And guys, if you're just joining us, Reuben Leader is joining us. The name of the book is You Might Feel a Little Prick. It's his first novel, but there's a lot of writing going on here. If you want to find out more about him, you can go to www.reubenleder.com and check out all the stuff going on there as well. So I lost my train of thought here, but really, really quickly, I did want to ask you in regards to what your writing schedule is like. Are you write at the same time every day? Are you a putterer? How do you kind of put this stuff together?
No, I've learned to be the most important thing to learn is self-discipline. I used to deliver mail at LA City Hall and the public library and all that, and in the break room there was just constant games of bid whist going on, and you just learn to shut it out, and you learn to work. You learn to do a couple of pages a day, because if you do a couple of pages a day, pretty soon it's done. You got something. So I learned early on that just do it every day. I do it when I always start in the morning because I'm freshest, and unless I'm on a deadline, I'll go until I can tell the brain's on strike, and then I'll stop for the day. But as long as you do it every day, that's the most important thing.
And the other thing that I want to kind of get into when we come back from the other side of this break, too, is that, there is a large morality streak that runs through the book and runs through a lot of your work. But I also want to talk about how it is, and there won't be enough time right now to do this, but how you manage to mix message into moment without it becoming preachy, because it doesn't. I want to give you that compliment too. I never felt like I was being preached at. I felt like the anger sprung from character and situation and action. But there is an urge, especially when you've got your axes to grind, to kind of go full throttle, and I'm interested to find out that. Guys, if you're just joining us, Reuben Leader is joining us. He's a Golden Globe and Emmy nominee for his writing credits on Star Trek The Next Generation, The Incredible Hulk, and of course Magnum P.I. He has directed theatrical features that have had Greta Sachi, Donald Sutherland, and Jürgen Prochnow. People I really, really like. I want to get some stories about that too when we get back. And it's a pleasure to have you on this morning. By the way, where are we talking to you from right now?
The far, far outskirts of Los Angeles, and about as far in the suburbs as you can get and still be in the city limits.
By the way, I'm moving to Santa Clarita. I'm moving to Santa Clarita next weekend.
Oh,
so I'll be.
Then we'll sort of be neighbors. You're in Wisconsin right now, right?
No. They're in Wisconsin. I'm in the city of New Orleans, my friend. All those other people are up in Wisconsin doing their thing. I'm in the other crazy place that's a collection of suburbs full of lunatics. The other place. Guys, just like I said, when we get back from the break, I really want to kind of dig in. I would love to hear your thoughts on how one tells a story with a moral streak in it without turning it into a preacher sermon is a really cool thing. Guys, you'll hear the music now, and that takes us into the break. Reuben, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you sticking around. The name of the book, by the way, is You Might Feel a Little Prick. There it is. So we'll be right back after these messages. You Might Feel a Little Prick. Reuben Leader's book is out now. It's available. It's on paperback. It can be downloaded. It can be read on the computers and the newfangled technologies. I got a chance to read a hardbound copy. It is an absolute blast. It is nail-biting. It is gut-wrenching. It's got colorful characters. Before we went to the break, welcome back, by the way, I asked you the question, how does one tell a story of morality and at the same time not turn it into a preacher's sermon?
I guess we can go back to Lieutenant Sikorsky as an example of that. He comes in and he's mostly doing shtick. He's fun. He's old-timey police detective. His references are to stuff that happened in the 70s, and he goes off on tangents and stuff like that. But the story but ultimately, without spoilers here, ultimately he has to make the most moral decision in the book, and that's what to do with Julie and Nick at the end. And so he has to ponder that, and he talks about what his daughter went through with his late daughter went through with cancer, and all the stuff the cancer industry did to her that ultimately killed her and ultimately forced her daughter, his granddaughter, to run away, and consequently his search to find her combines with the Julie and Nick's main story. And so he goes on for 4 or 5 pages about what happened to his daughter, to Nick and Julie, and he's not really telling them for any sense of edification, but he's telling them because he's working through it. And so he's a funny character, yeah, but he has the most moral choice to make in this book, and I couldn't have had him do that unless he was really, really a funny character and a very the kind of guy you'd like to have a beer with. And so yeah, that's how I mixed the brew of a very serious point of view with humor.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting thing too, because one of the things that begins to kind of accumulate in the book is everybody's got a horror story. Everybody's got one of these stories.
Yeah, and I should say what happened to his daughter, I didn't pull out of thin air. It's what happened to my late wife with cancer, and so I used it, but I think I used it in a very positive and constructive way, and most important, in an entertaining way. I mean, it's anyway.
Well, it's funny because we've had so many conversations on this show over the weekends to give them a chance to be mindful and kind of recenter themselves as they get ready for the work week. The other thing is that that moment and a number of other moments, for all their humor and for sometimes the pitch black nature of what's going on, there is a deep well of compassion. The idea of being able to move to the other side of grief and to find out what's funny and to find out what's absurd. I mean, often the funniest things are the most absurd ones, and there is a sense of a piece of realizing the kind of, not futility, because the world in this book is not futile. I mean, it's a world worth fighting for, and it's a world worth living. But there is a sense of the ability to kind of move to a place of, I guess, compassion and empathy really is at the center of the book in regards to its ultimate resolution. Is that fair?
Exactly. It's very fair without giving it away. Yeah, it's very fair.
And it's
I couldn't end it without a sense of hope, especially with what's going on in the world today with COVID. The book takes place just before COVID hits, so I set it there purposely for that. But yeah, it does end on that ray of hope, and that was really important to me.
Yeah, it's funny too.
I'd gone through.
You detected at the center.
It's hilarious too. I mean,
he's funny.
I don't want to give away some of that stuff, but I've never. What happened to the Samoan nurse? Shouldn't happen to anybody.
Well, the other thing is too, though. I mean, just to open. I mean, literally, there are lines in the beginning when you're absolutely trying. You want this awful freight chain of checking in an emergency situation to stop, but you can't stop laughing too. I mean, there are just moments that are just belly laugh funny in some really horrid situations, which is why I made the comparison to not only The Hospital with George C. Scott, but MASH, Robert Altman's film. There really is a streak of real kind of dark, vibrant humor that runs through this, of a kind of, makes you want to scream, and it's a lot of fun, and it's an easy read, guys. I don't mean that in regards to a simple read. It just moves, and you move through it laughing and horrified at the same time. So it was a real joy.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Jimmy.
You got it. And by the way, guys, please buy this book. Reuben, I have to leave you now. I could keep you on forever and a day. There's so much else to talk about, so many other things in regards to what you've done with your career. But let's just start by saying, guys, you really should get your hands on. You might feel a little prick. The information can be found at reubenleader.com. All kinds of information about him there. Let me make a really quick check here. guys, if we'll have it up there eventually. It's going to be on our Sleeper Cab library as one of our picks. Please check it out. You're welcome back anytime. And by the way, enjoy that California day, okay?
I absolutely will, and I don't mind getting up in the morning for one of these. This is great. Thank you so much, Jimmy.
You got it, sir.